These two cartridges are some of the very best 22 centerfires the world has ever seen. And if you think that's all marketing, well, you're dead wrong. The 22 ARC and the 22 Creedmoor are very different cartridges, but they have some surprising similarities too. And their downrange performance beats older varmint cartridges like the 22-250 and the 220 Swift, but they also eclipse cartridges we think of for big game like the 243 and the 25-06. Now, if you don't believe me, stay tuned. We're going to dive into both of these cartridges, what makes them unique, what gives them awesome performance, and how you could decide which one is better. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe down below to see more like it. And please leave us a comment. Do you really buy that these new fangled 22 cartridges are better than what we've had for 100 years?
That pig, man, I found a couple of shells on the arrowhead.
Well, tell us why or why not. All right, so first we'll start with the 22 Creedmoor. Now this cartridge has been around for a long time, basically since the 6.5 Creedmoor started getting necked down by wildcatters, but only in the last couple of years has become SAAMI standardized, and that's why you see kind of its proliferation onto the market now. Now, like I said, it's just a necked down 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge that shoots 224 bullets. It's got a 30-degree shoulder, likes medium to slower burning powders like H4350, Stayball 6.5, and in some cases like Retumbo H1000 speed powders. Now, this is standardized with a 1-in-8 twist barrel, which will handle 80 grain bullets, but it also doesn't spin apart some of the really light, thin-jacketed varmint bullets at blistering velocities. Now, it's got slightly more case capacity than the 22-250 and produces better velocities. And especially if you were to use the same length barrel, it would probably even beat velocities of the renowned 220 Swift. So with the 22 Creedmoor, your velocity is going to depend on your projectile powder and barrel length. You might see velocities from 3,000 feet per second up to even, maybe 4,000 or a little higher. It's all going to depend on various factors, but it is a very fast, very efficient, and deadly cartridge. So the little 22 ARC has kind of a similar story to the Creedmoor in that it's a wildcat, but for a very different reason. And that all involves around the AR-15 gas gun. Now, guys have been necking down 6.5 Grindle brass for quite a few years to get better performance in their gas gun. What does that mean? Well, slightly better case capacity, but having a shorter case that you can fit these long, highly efficient bullets in, and they'll still fit in a standard AR-15 length magazine. Now, if you try that in a 223, it's not going to work. The long bullets you can't jam them in the case far enough to fit them inside the magazine. So it solves a couple of problems. Now, this was standardized as a 7-twist barrel, which will handle up to these, 88 grain ELD match bullets. But at these speeds, it won't spin apart lighter varmint bullets. It likes faster burning powders. CFE 223 and Lever Evolution produce really good performance, accurate 25-20. But if you want kind of the best temperature stability, stuff like Stayball Match is really accurate, and Varget is pretty doggone hard to beat. It's a gas gun cartridge, but this little thing is full of surprises, and I think it really comes into its own when loaded to bolt action pressures, and we're going to talk a lot more about that coming up.
Hey, sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled programming. I'm executive editor Natalie Krebs, and I just wanted to drop in real fast to tell you that these new whitetail hoodies are available in our merch shop. It is a riff on the November 1979 cover of Outdoor Life magazine. They come in a couple different colors. They're super soft, and they're on sale now. Go to the link in the description or go to store.outdoorlife.com and buy one, buy two, buy three to help me justify having gone hunting this morning and showing up late for work. Thanks so much.
If we're really getting down to what sets the 22 ARC and 22 Creedmoor apart, a big portion of that is bullets. Now, this is a 50 grain Hornady VMAX, which would be pretty typical for, shooting coyotes and varmints out of a 22-250 or a 220 Swift. They came standard with like 12 or even 14 twist barrels, and they were just a great choice. But the ARC and Creed, and to be fair, if you were to have a custom tight twist barrel cut with maybe a less sloppy chamber, in 22-250 or 220 Swift, you could achieve pretty similar performance. You may or may not better it, but you could do pretty well. So that's something worth pointing out. But the 22 Creedmoor and ARC in factory offerings have already taken care of all those issues. You know, they've got the 30-degree shoulder, pretty taperless body, and they're designed specifically to leverage heavy bullets like this that are very ballistically efficient. You know, these ones range from the 71 to 88 grain range. And, you know, all you got to do is compare the two to understand that these long high BC bullets are going to have a little bit better external ballistics than the little 50 grain VMAX we love so much. So a good thing about the 22 ARC and Creedmoor is you can use little, you know, varmint cartridges you like, but I think you're kind of neutering your performance a little bit. You know, they really perform best with the heavy high BC bullets, and it frankly elevates the performance of these things way beyond what I ever realistically thought they would. So compare, you know, for example, these bullets, which we've got an 80 grain ELD, or one of the, I think that's an 88 grain ELD match, a 77 grain Barnes LRX, 80 grain ELDX, which is a fantastic hunting bullet, and this, which is 71 grain Meguiar Ballistics Copper Rose. Now this one, you know, very efficient, streamlined. It's machined from copper, but it has a cavity in there. It's not an FMJ. This thing expands violently when it hits fluid, petals shear off, and the base continues penetrating. Is a really effective bullet. Compare these to, like, say, a 90 grain 6mm AccuBond, or a 25 cal 110 grain Interbond, I believe that is. I don't think they make that bullet anymore. But some of these classic bullets that we really liked in like a 243 or 25-06, these 22 cals, they're a little smaller in diameter, a little bit lighter, but they offer, in these cartridges, they offer better trajectory, better wind drift, and better impact velocity than some of these bullets that we really liked, and even classic cartridges that we'd take on big game with. So give credit where credit's due. A lot of the performance of the ARC and Creedmoor is because of the bullets they shoot. All right, so I don't think anyone would argue that the 22 ARC and Creedmoor are great options for varmints and coyotes and all kinds of little stuff. Where it gets really interesting to me is using them on big game. Now, to back that up, I've really been fascinated for a long time about the potential of using a 22-250 as a sheep rifle. I've always thought it would be a good sheep rifle. And part of that even is based upon reading, you know, about old market hunters like Frank Glazer, who preferred the 220 Swift for moose and caribou, and he was shooting terrible bullets back then. Now, I never made that leap because the bullets and, you know, offerings I could get for 22-250 that would work in standard barrels, you always gave up too much wind drift. And so I just never did it. But these bullets have really changed the game, and I and many other people have been shooting stuff with them over the past year and had pretty impressive results. Now, I shot my moose with a 22 ARC last year. I know people have shot other moose, caribou, and sheep with 22 ARC and Creedmoor. And I got friends that have hunted in Africa with it and killed a ton of plains game. You know, I've killed a couple black bears with it, and antelope, and even have, I shot a white-tailed deer last year with this 80 grain ELDX bullet, you know, out of a 223, loaded at pretty low velocities. So if we're talking 2,000 feet per second and above, I've got no doubts that these cartridges are every bit as lethal as the 243 or 25-06 rounds that I used for many years. So we've got two of the most advanced 22 cartridges you can get, shooting some of the best bullets you can get. How do you choose between the two? This one has more powder, which means more faster, more better, right?
Don't know. Mango only pawn in game of life.
Well, it's not nearly that simple, and there's a lot of ways that these cartridges are in fact very similar. So we're going to dive into all the important ways of how these cartridges are similar, how they're different, and give you the info to pick which one's going to work best for your application and needs. All right, so one of the biggest things people want to know when comparing any cartridge is velocity and velocity disparity. Now, you would think that because the 22 Creedmoor has a lot higher case capacity that you're automatically going to have significantly more velocity.
Because it's the fastest who gets paid, and it's the fastest who gets laid. Oh, yeah.
But overshooting thousands of rounds of both 22 ARC and Creedmoor, that is not always the case. Now, the biggest disparity is going to come in factory ammo. Factory 22 ARC ammo is loaded to about 52,000 PSI to be safe in gas guns, but a bolt action can easily handle 62,000, no problem. And there is load data specifically for bolt actions available in ARC, and that really boosts your velocity performance up surprisingly really close to a lot of factory and even hand-loaded 22 Creedmoor. So we're just going to run through. I got the chronograph set up, got factory 80 grain ELDX Hornady ammo. We're going to shoot a couple rounds through the gun, and then we're going to shoot a couple of my bolt action pressure hand loads through it to show you kind of the disparity, and then we'll take a look at the 22 Creedmoor. .2846. .2850, so that's a good ballpark for factory 80 grain ELDX out of this 20-inch barrel. Now, your barrel length, individual barrel, it's all going to vary a little bit, but now I've got two shots lined up of my hand-loaded 80 grain ELDX. .3104. .3116. .3120. And that's about what that averages. So you're talking about, you know, 2850, 2950, 3050. You're talking about over 200 feet per second faster with this hand load than in the factory offering that you're going to be using in a gas gun. So that's something to keep in mind as we move to the 22 Creedmoor. So now I've got a 20-inch 22 Creedmoor up here to kind of get an idea of the velocities on that. I've got a couple rounds of factory loaded 80 grain ELDX, and underneath it I've got some of my hand loaded 80 grain ELDX. So these are all the same bullets, just different loadings and charge weights, same barrel length, and we'll see what this one produces. So keep in mind we're still sitting at around 3120 with the hand-loaded ARC. .3180. .3182. All right, that's factory. Now this is hand-loaded stuff. .3157. .3151. So in this case, my hand-loaded stuff is a little slower than the factory, and I've seen it kind of flip-flop, just depends on your barrel and all that. That being said, you'll notice that compared to top-end, 22 ARC hand loads, the 22 Creedmoor doesn't really give you much advantage in terms of velocity. Now, I've used a couple different powders to achieve like over 3,200 feet per second with this barrel, but once I break that, my accuracy really started to deteriorate, and you start seeing pressure signs and stuff like that. So I backed off to where it shoots much more consistently, and that's not much different than my 22 ARC loads. All right, so the biggest question when it comes to this velocity disparity is what real difference does that make downrange? Now, I kind of set the bar where I want 2,000 foot per second of impact velocity if I'm going to be shooting at anything substantial other than steel at an animal. And with, these 22 Creedmoor loads and my bolt action 22 arc loads, all that really translates to is about 25 yards. In this temperature and conditions, these 22 Creedmoor loads are hitting 2,000 feet per second at about 625 to 650 yards. My 22 arc is right at 600 yards, so it's really not much of a difference. Now, if I back off to another arc hand load using Varget, 28 grains of Varget, if you want a really accurate arc load, just try that with an 80 grainer. But that is like 2970, which in this, today in these conditions would hit 2,000 feet per second at about 545 to 560 yards. So that's a little bit of difference, maybe 75 yards. If you're talking factory 22 arc ammo, it's about, I believe, 450 yards or so that you're going to be hitting 2,000 feet per second, which if you're being realistic, any, big game animal that you would be shooting with this cartridge, 99% of your shots are going to be or should be under 450 yards. So you got to be realistic about what advantages you think it may be giving you. And if you weigh too heavily on velocity, you might miss some other key advantages that the arc offers you. All right, now after velocity, accuracy is going to be one of the next big questions. Is there a distinct advantage between either the two cartridges? And I would say that generally the 22 arcs I've shot have probably seemed more consistent with their accuracy, but that's not to say the 22 Creedmoors don't shoot really well too, especially when they're in a good performance window. I've seen the 22 Creedmoor get a little sporadic when it's pushed really fast, but that's not uncommon with big time overbore or just really fast cartridges. I would say that it's kind of a wash. You're perfectly capable of getting a really accurate 22 Creedmoor, and even the factory 22 arcs I've shot, like the Ruger American, are really consistent as well. So my feelings are leaning towards the arc as having an accuracy advantage, but that's not to say that the 22 Creedmoor can't be made to shoot really, really well as two. All right, so we talked about velocity, accuracy, and you throw in bullet efficiency. It makes these cartridges really effective at shooting long distances. Now, even out to beyond 1,000 yards, a lot of these loads are going to stay supersonic, so you can still shoot targets and have a lot of fun doing it at those distances. I would still keep my hunting distances where your load is over 2,000 feet per second, and these cartridges really at those short to mid-range distances are just deadly. But just for the heck of it, we're gonna do a little shooting at 1,000 yards and see how well we can do. Hit it. That's the first round impact. Boom. There it is. So even the little 22 arc is capable of some pretty doggone good shooting. So we've seen how effective the little 22 arc can be. We'll try this 22 Creedmoor with the same thing. All right, target. This is about a about 0.3 of a mil wide target at 1,000 yards. So it's about 1 minute of angle. So really not a very easy target to hit. If you have any kind of error you know, most guns, like that target is smaller than the dispersion of the gun. So we'll just throw 3 rounds down there and see what happens. And that one hit low, like quite a bit low. Oops, I'll just hold for it. Just a tiny bit low. Low again. Well, as you can see, it's not necessarily as simple as more powder, more better. For whatever reason, yeah, this particular load, which chronographs faster, seems to be falling off and shooting a little lower than what my arc was doing. So yeah, I don't know exactly what that is, but it's a lesson that shooting at long distance is often not nearly as easy as some people try to make it look. All right, so something kind of interesting happened there, which may lead us into kind of the next segment, which is bullet selection. So I fired 3 shots. My first shot went low. I was using 6.9 mils of correction of elevation, which I use 7 mils for my arc, and at those velocities that makes sense. Well, my first shot dropped way low, like 0.5 mil low. I made a correction and it was higher but still low at the target and still low on my hold. So I increased my hold and the bullet still went lower again. And that's kind of a head scratcher because at 100 yards, like, this is pretty much just as accurate as that 22 arc, a little bit faster with the same bullet, same barrel length. Now this is just spitballing, but the one thing I can think of that's different is the twist rate. So it's an 8 twist barrel, 22 Creedmoor versus a 7 twist 22 arc. You know, that could potentially be an issue where those bolts are slowing down out there enough that it's causing some instability, because I have seen trying to load these 80 grain ELDX in 8 twist 223 barrels that they just don't seem to be real stable and they don't shoot very accurately. You know, I could be wrong, but that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. And bullet selection really is one of the things you want to think about if you're considering an arc or a Creedmoor. So you could get a Creedmoor barrel made in a 7 twist and not have to worry about it, but then you're going to want to avoid some of the really light, thin jacketed varmint bullets. There's bullets, you know, like the 88 grain ELD match. Some people can get them to shoot in a Creedmoor in an 8 twist. Some people can't. Bullets like the 71 grain copper rose are not going to shoot well in an 8 twist. And this, of course, you know, kind of depends on your elevation and your temperature and environmental stuff like that. So there's not like a clear-cut answer. But generally, that 7 twist and a 22 arc is going to handle a wider variety of bullets and potentially stabilize them better at long distances, even though they might not start out quite as fast. All right, so really one of the more important things you want to consider, you know, when you're deciding whether 22 arc or 22 Creedmoor is better is your rifle build and what you want, because there are some big differences, and you know, one cartridge offers some advantages and the other one, you know, kind of covers a lot of different ground. So the 22 Creedmoor is, like the 6.5 Creedmoor, compatible with, you know, any standard short action with a standard, you know, 6.5 Creedmoor or 308 bolt face. This makes it really versatile. You know, this factory, you know, just a factory gun with a Stiller Wombat action that's skeletonized, like cool, lightweight action that's real slick. It's great for the 22 Creedmoor. You know, if you want to build your own, you can order actions, you know, like this Aero Precision Solus action that's got a standard bolt face. You screw a 22 Creedmoor barrel on there, throw it in a stock as I have, and you can have a really good shooting rifle. It's simple. Another thing is magazine compatibility. So because the 22 Creedmoor uses everything, you know, everything Creedmoor. Standard 7.62 or 6.5 Creedmoor magazines work in it, and they are really easy to find. So basically, the 22 Creedmoor platforms for it are much more widely available and standardized than the 22 ARC. So two kind of unique, maybe disadvantages of the 22 ARC are that it's very short and kind of requires its own magazine. It was designed for the AR-15 magazine, but being a neck down 6.5 Grendel requires a little bit slightly different magazine. Now they're compatible with regular ARs, but these are not, you can't just take your average 223 magazine and run 22 ARC in them. The best magazines I've found are made by Geisley. They're pretty expensive, but they work really well. I've had the Duramags work well, as well as a couple other ones, but options are more limited than with the 22 Creedmoor. In a bolt action, some bolt actions, you can get production 22 ARCs like this Ruger Gen 2 American. Really affordable, really accurate, and this is made to take an AR mag too. I think they come with a Duramag. This one's a Geisley, and they're a little clunky, but they work and they're available. Now, other bolt actions, if you're thinking of an AICS, your options are going to be even more limited. So, like this one, for example, built on a Zermatt Origin Action, uses AICS mags. And these MDT 10 round ARC mags are really good. They work really well, but they're kind of heavy, and there's not really a wide variety of them. Whereas if this is chambered in 22 Creedmoor, I could just take a standard 3 round, 308 magazine and have a flush fitting mag. So magazines are something you want to consider. If you like the 22 ARC and that kind of sacrifice is worth it, then that's going to be a better option. Now, another key difference to note between these rifle builds is that the 22 ARC is a squatty, short little cartridge and really is undersized for a standard small action or a standard short action. This Origin Action would work totally fine with a 22 Creedmoor or any other short action cartridge, and it does work well with the ARC. But really, you've got more action length than you need, and that's not always ideal, especially if you're wanting to optimize things. Now, the 22 ARC is optimal for mini actions, like this Q Mini Fix. It's truly a short mini action that's sized appropriately for the cartridge, and this uses AR mags as well, and it's a really cool, compact gun that just works really well and really embraces kind of the advantages of the smaller 22 ARC cartridge. Now, there are a few other mini bolt actions out there, but again, options are just so much more limited than the 22 Creedmoor. So if you're wanting the most flexibility, the 22 Creedmoor is probably going to be the way you want to go. Even though the actions are a little bit longer and the ammunition's a little heavier, there's still some really lightweight, cool, packable rifles in 22 Creedmoor that would make great hunting rigs. This Mountain Reaper from Fierce has a side folding stock, takes AICS magazines, it has kind of a modular AR grip and really light handguard, and is ARCA compatible. There's just much more flexibility in the 22 Creedmoors. You've got some key differences in what you may or may not want in a rifle build. Now, other minor things are the powder that they use. So like I mentioned earlier, the ARC uses faster, more 223 appropriate powders, and the 22 Creedmoor uses kind of mid to slower burning powders depending on your barrel length. An advantage, I think, of the 22 ARC is it just uses less powder. It's more efficient. You'll use about 25% less powder than the Creedmoor, which generates less barrel heat and will give you a longer barrel life. I haven't heard any hard figures on barrel life. I would estimate you're probably going to get around 3,000 rounds out of a good ARC barrel, and maybe 13 to 1900 out of a Creedmoor barrel. That depends on a lot of factors, but you're going to have better barrel life with an ARC, and you're not going to heat up your barrel as much. So if you're into shooting prairie dogs or any high volume shooting, even just practice, the 22 ARC does offer you some advantages there. So there you have it. Rather than just focusing on box velocity numbers, there's some more important things you need to consider. The 22 Creedmoor is better if you want to shoot a standard bolt face and have a lot more versatility when it comes to actions and components. The 22 Arc is better if you're a high volume shooter, you hand load, you really like a mini action or anything like that. The performance of these cartridges is actually very similar, and these other factors are really what's going to matter when it comes to picking what'll work best for you.